Hello. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the launch of the Modern in Southeast Asian Art, a Reader, a co-publication between National Gallery Singapore and the NTU Centre for Contemporary Art Singapore. I'm Phoebe Scott. I'm a senior curator at National Gallery Singapore, one of the contributing editors to the book as well, and I'm very delighted to welcome you to this special event for a book that has been very long in the making, and a book that is extremely close to the hearts of its editors, and especially Patrick Flores and TK Sabapati, who have been the driving force behind this project. So we're very happy to be able to welcome you to this special book launch today. I'd also like to acknowledge the dedicated team of contributing editors, many of whom have been able to join us in person today as well. So as you can see, we do have quite an extensive program this afternoon with some welcome remarks, a discussion from the editors, and 2 panel discussions related to different aspects of the development of the reader. So in the interest of your own stamina, I want to let you know right away that we are also having a coffee break at 3, and coffee is provided, so pace yourself till then. And to celebrate our launch with you today, we're offering a special 25% discount on copies of the reader, which you can buy at the table outside. So we have a selection of copies available, and if we run out, you can also pre-order. So to formally open the program, I'd like to invite Dr. Eugene Tan, Director of National Gallery Singapore, to make some remarks.
Thank you, Phoebe. Well, good afternoon, Australian High Commissioner to Singapore, Your Excellency Alistair Cox, speakers, writers, editors, our colleagues from ASEAN, distinguished guests and friends. A very warm welcome to National Gallery Singapore, and thank you very much for joining us for this symposium and the launch of the Modern in Southeast Asia, a Reader. It's a delight to see so many of you here with us today. The Modern Reader, as Phoebe mentioned, has been many years in the making. The genesis for an anthology of writings on modern art was first sparked under the auspices of co-publisher NTU CCA in 2015, submitted as a proposal for an anthology of writings on the modern in Southeast Asia. Following a series of consultations between the NTU CCA and the gallery, a formidable scope for the book was established. The early ambition of this reader necessitated the collaboration of scholars, academics, writers, and editors, requiring ample time, space, and resources to allow for potentialities to transpire in the name of advancing art history. The 2-volume reader contains a vast network of significant historical texts, critical studies, and research, many published in English for the very first time. These texts are interposed by introduction from scholars across the region, many of whom are here with us today as speakers and participants. These annotations open readers up to new possibilities in understanding the modern within, even beyond the artistic sphere of Southeast Asia. The Modern Reader manifests National Gallery Singapore's efforts to reflexively rewrite the art histories of Southeast Asia and reposition them as integral to global art histories. Since its inception, the gallery has continuously grappled with notions of the modern and Southeast Asia, fundamental concepts on which the institution was built to reflect and represent. This has been a challenging task, given the complexities of conferring the diversities of so many historically, culturally, and politically heterogeneous places that form this geopolitically defined space, such as the dominant Eurocentric ideas of modernism and national interests, likewise imbued in our institution's establishment. The Modern Reader draws together these seemingly disparate strands in its considered confrontation with the modern. The careful organization of these texts, unrestricted by geography or chronology, is based on contributors' real apprehensions of its significance and, importantly, potential. This work makes room for individual exploration of the multifarious textures of Southeast Asian writing, acting as a catalyst for an evolution in the understanding of modernity, both as period and concept in the region. Today, you will hear in discussions several key contributors who have woven their voices into this monumental text. The range of perspectives in this publication would not have been possible without the kind collaboration of all involved. We are grateful to co-publishers and TUCCA for their generosity in the development of the modern reader. We're also indebted to our distinguished editorial team who have so generously contributed to the art historical discourse of today. Editors T.K. Sabapati and Patrick Flores, associate editors Julie Ewington and Phoebe Scott, the editorial committee, many of whom are here today, Grithia Gawi Wong, Horikawa Lisa, Manupam Lengaram, Roger Nelson, Roberto Polino, Seng Eugene, Aminudin Siregar, and Simon Sun, as well as Antariksa and Yinka, who are unfortunately not able to join us in person. I would also like to voice my heartiest congratulations to the gallery's publications team, particularly project editor Charmaine Un, who has given the past 8 years to this project. Also, this symposium would not be possible without the dedication of the gallery's curatorial programs team, Erica Lai, Jack Ing Tan, and Jolene Low, as well as associate editor and gallery senior curator Phoebe Scott, overseeing the proceedings of the day. The gallery The gallery would also like to thank the ASEAN Cultural Fund for its kind support of the launch and symposium. Thank you everyone again for your support of the Modern in Southeast Asia, a reader, and this symposium. I hope you find today's discussions as stimulating as the publication that has engendered them. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eugene. I'd now like to invite Uta Metaba, founding director of NTU Center for Contemporary Art Singapore and professor at NTU School of Art, Design and Media, to also give some welcome remarks.
Excellencies, Eugene, TK, Patrick, and so many friends, good afternoon. Yeah, also thanks to NGS for having me here as a partner in this long-term project. This publication that we finally can hold in our hands is a testament to the generosity and the camaraderie of these unique networks. I would also like to express my gratitude to NTU CCA's founding team, who had been involved in early stages, Samantha Leong, who is not here with us today, who really joined TK in early meetings at the center. Yeah, I have to say it's quite emotional to see now what mounts to the finalization of this project that goes back for more than a decade. Yeah, today I wholeheartedly congratulate TK Sabapathy and Dr. Patrick Flores for this highly significant contribution to the history of art and to the history of art in Southeast Asia. This long-term research project across many histories, many nations, and many archives, personal and institutional, finally comes to fruition in the format of this fast 2-volume book, more than 1,000 pages, filled with the research, writing, and commitment of so many before us who have created the most recent modern culture of our entire region. To make this material, the vast majority prior untranslated to English, accessible and available to many more researchers, art historians and artists, and also those interested in cultural development in this complicated context that we call Southeast Asia available, is the achievement of so many. Our gratitude goes, as stated, to TK and Patrick, to Eugene, to Charmaine, as well to a big group of researchers, designers, translators, and those who generously opened their archives. More editors to go before and after. And it's really amazing that this came finally together. Southeast Asia is a slippery and complicated identification for a complex and diverse geography that is also a post-colonial construction colored by geopolitics. Bringing together this text from the late 19th century to the 20th century, the modern in Southeast Asian art a reader is an unprecedented and important undertaking. And really, as we said, this text by significant artists very often, critics and exhibition makers who constituted the modern interregion, we really have to be grateful because these texts were not just published, they occurred in journals, were buried in archives, have to be found by many in visits to the region. And it's really hard even to explain how this all came together. And to say this now, to have this now together in the hands as an easygoing research access is just stunning and is not a given. And again, I have to thank the gallery and also their team for holding this together, holding all the contributors together, and don't giving up. Phoebe spent the last years on this, and Charmaine. It is a very exceptional and rare occurrence that those joint forces could finally lead to what we have in our hands. We have a full afternoon with many of the contributors here, which is amazing. And I think now we really can enjoy to hear more what's inside these covers of this outstanding book. And again, Eugene, thank you for allowing us to stay in this project. Michelle Go is also here. She was very early on involved in connecting us to the gallery when also the center came to a limits in the support of this. And the National Gallery was the right place, had the right research team, and had the long stamina to get this going. And again, really thanks to everybody. And again, thank you for having us as a partner in this endeavor. And thanks TK and Patrick.
So, as the many people who've been involved in this book will know, it's been a very long journey of more than 7 years since the initial workshop at NTU CCA. And these have been years of intense discussion, exploration, collaboration, and it has to be said, more than the occasional period of intense frustration. So, to share more about the making of this book and their remarkable journey, I'd like to invite the two editors of the book, TK Sabapati and Patrick Flores, both towering figures in the writing of Southeast Asian modern art history in their own right, to come forward and share some reflections on the development of the modern in Southeast Asian art, the reader. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe, for the introduction. An event like this usually has a cast of thousands to acknowledge. And so let me thank first the ASEAN Cultural Fund for supporting this launch and funding the travel and accommodation of delegates. And the curatorial program team of Erika Lai, Tan Ji Ying, Jolene Lo, and Joyce Chung for organizing the launch today. To begin the symposium, Kanaga and I have decided to walk you through the making of the reader through a conversation around both process and poetics. But before that, I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to Kanaga Sabapati for being the vital intelligence and nervous system of this humbling necessity that is the reader. To some, the reader may be a fool's errand or a needless conceit, but for Kanaga, it is an evolving imperative. Kanaga has been a constant mentor and inspiration to me and to countless colleagues in this room and elsewhere. He has always been caring and generous with his teaching, patient with explication, attentive to nuance, alert to common wisdom, and committed to curiosity and speculation. We will be forever grateful to you, Kanaga, and we are all honored to be with you to launch The Reader, which is a testament to your unwavering dedication to the discourse of Southeast Asian art. So bravo Canada. So on to the day job. You are uh, tasked to talk about the beginnings and impetus of this reader. So I turn over to you.
I think I should go home. Uh, Thank you, Patrick. Thank you all of you, each and every one of you for being here. And each and every one of you has an imprint in these two volumes. For many more decades than the 8 years that has taken to put it together, far more. Although we need to, because these are the parameters within which we measure things, namely to deal with lives lived individually and collaboratively, leading to these publications. The beginnings, personally, for me, they are to be found in the mid-70s, when a handful of us, located in various sites in Southeast Asia, initially unknown to one another, but very quickly connecting with one another, began tentatively, clumsily, and nervously to teach the modern of various aspects of Southeast Asian art. And in doing that, just about barely staying 1 week ahead of the lecture in terms of materials, both visual and literary. Grabbing, getting, pasting, cutting, anything that has been written anytime, anywhere. Copying these, binding them together as ad hoc readers and distributing them. These have accumulated through numerous conversations, numerous projects subsequently formalized institutionally and through various agencies, and the setting up of bibliographies, seminars, and publications. This particular reader would not have been possible without all of these. And it has been developed not out of nothing, but in cognizance and awareness of these numerous publications, and still courageously steering a course quite different from many of them, singly and individually. Precisely, I think we can pinpoint a date at which this project began. And that is 7th and 8th of December 2015. The locations, the NTU CCA, under the directorship of Uta Metaba. For 2 days, the CCA NTU invited a number of persons to convene on its premises to talk about the feasibility and the possibility of putting together an anthology of texts. With your permission, Patrick, I'd like to read who they were who were present on that day. Things don't just happen. Things happen because humans desire them, fabricate them, design them, and bring them forth. And these are among those present at that meeting: Uta Metabawa, Magdalena Magiera, Vera May, Shabir Hussein Mustafa, Phoebe Scott, Seng Eugene, Eugene Tan, Farah Wardani, Yin Ke, Michelle Lim, Ahmad Mashadi. I insist on going through the list. Peter Chopet, Imran Tajuddin, Lai Chi-Kien, Pauline Phan, Patrick Flores, Girtia Gawiwong, Roger Nelson, Aminudin Siregar, Simon Soon, Michelle Wong. Many of these were reincarnated a year later to bring about this volume. One more matter. Rather pedantically, we titled provisionally the proposed publication as, mark the words, Art Writing in Southeast Asia, 1880 to 1980, a reader. I tell you what, it's not bad, what we did then, because so many of those things have all been refabricated and reformulated in this. So, unbeknown to us in December 2015, we had seeded this publication. Unbeknown, but that is rather disingenuous. At the end of that session, we said, but how is this going to be published? And one Eugene Tan, who was then the newly appointed director of the National Gallery, put his hand up. We'll do it. Bravo, Eugene. I cannot personally say how satisfying it has been to work with the National Gallery. And since 2015, right till now, the gallery has never stinted in its support. And while Uta Medabau may have drawn back to the background, she has been unfailingly attentive and caring about the project throughout until today. Thank you, Uta. Patrick, in 2016, the National Gallery took over the project and convened a workshop for 2 days. And in that workshop were gathered wonderful persons who collectively produced this. I'm wondering if you could recall that moment and say something about it, because I don't exactly how it happened, but by then you and I were appointed as the editors. Well, you needn't recall that, but the gathering of this band of persons. And one more matter, towards distilling the report from the 2015, we thought we will put together a brief. And the brief was prefaced rather hortatorily with these questions. Take them matter-of-factly. Who spoke of the modern? Where and when was it written? How was it written and received? And so on and so on and so forth. Could you just, in all of 6.5 minutes,
This is a bit off script, Kanaga, but it happened.
I think we can steal a few more
Ready,
minutes.
yeah.
Yeah.
It happened here, NGS. We assembled writers from the region who eventually became the contributing editors of the anthology, and we will introduce them later. To the question of the reader, so the reader seeks to ask who spoke of the modern, right? As you mentioned earlier, where and when was it written, how was it written and received? So to answer these questions would be to historicize the text and that flesh out the subject of inquiry that is the modern. To deal with these questions is also to partly explain the tenor, the rhetorical condition, and the mode of address of the textual material. So we discern in the reader layers of registers. One layer is the text and its context. No? Another layer is the assembly of texts taken together and speaking to each other within a corpus and a chronology. Still another layer is the introduction to each text or the headnote by a contributing editor who chose the text. These introductions are done in the present, informed by scholarship and experience in the field through research, teaching, writing, curating, and related practices. These headnotes, therefore, are an index of another historical moment, which is the present, or the specific contemporary condition in which these texts are read in relation to other temporal markers like the past or the future. At this point, I would like to thank the contributing editors for their invaluable work, and they are all here except for 3. And maybe they can, stand up to be recognized. Antarixa, who is in Paris. Gritia Gawiwong, who is here. Gritia, please. Yeah. Lisa Horikawa. Lisa is... Manoporn Lyungaram. Roger Nelson. Roberto Paulino, who is in Manila. Phoebe Scott. Sang Eugene. Fresh from Leiden, Aminudin Siregar. Simon Sun. And Dean Kerr, who is in Paris. We also acknowledge the indispensable support of the publishers, of course, NGS and NTUCCA, the steady stewardship of the associate editors Phoebe Scott and Julie Ewington, and the tireless supervision of Charmaine Un, sorry. Is the immovable object to the irresistible force of the reader, as well as Ong Chen Min and Yam Yong Ling of the publications team of NGS. Thank you all. And now Kanaga about the content of the reading.
Yes. I recall the workshop in 2015 and the provisional title, and in that title was inserted rather pedantically perhaps the time span, which is about 100 years, approximately from 1880 to 1980. These are not finitely fixed endpoints of commencements and conclusions or endings, but as markers that we would gravitate towards and fill up. We have largely retained that span somewhat elastically. I think the earliest text that is in there is in 1848. Am I right, Frini, about that? 1840, the Radin Saleh text. Not that the reader commences with that. No, it isn't. That we'll come to that later on. That's not the beginning of the reader itself. And then it sort of tapers off towards the 1980s, which we have almost affirmed through the submission of text from our editorial colleagues to be the prevailing span for the modern in the region. It is not to say that the modern just closed, went to sleep in 1980. No, of course. It continues to be written beyond that and to the present. But the writing of the modern beyond that took on a different tone, timbre, and tenor, largely in the glare of the contemporary, or what emerged as the contemporary. And we say something about that towards the end, when Patrick introduces the modern and after and bids it adieu, and then says hello to the one who is just appearing in the horizon, so to speak. I have something to say about that towards the very end. The publication is in the English language. There are some 300 texts that have been culled from many, many hundreds more from the submissions, and many hundreds more that are out there which are not here. So some of you discerning readers may well miss your favorite writer or your preferred text. That's almost unavoidable. And all that it means is that there's room for another reader, yeah, to come on, say in about 45 years, somewhere else. Eugene, yes? Not here. Perhaps. Okay, that's not such a bad idea. And there are texts written in virtually all the languages in Southeast Asia, except, I think, Tagalog. Not out of omission, but there was more than enough, I think, in English and Spanish from the Philippines. And the then European colonial languages like Dutch, French, and English and Spanish. Some 125 texts have been newly translated into the English language. So this massive kind of new, if you like, textual archaeology that has been undertaken in putting this together. And one other last matter I want to say is that the range of texts in terms of location, that is sites of publication, the authorship is perhaps much more varied than one customarily sees in publications that come out of academies, which tend to publish the voices and the writings of fellow academicians. There is a kind of inward gestation that goes on. That is to say, accredited historians, accredited writers, curators, and so on and so forth. And in that sense, this reader is distinguished from existing readers and anthologies on art in Southeast Asia. And we hope, and I hope Patrick will ruminate on this towards the end, that this will temper our tolerance towards writings that don't quite correspond with our own artistic ideologies at present, which are very firmly held everywhere, curatorially and academically, we hope. So we're talking about genres of writing. And on that matter, perhaps, Patrick, you could say some things on the chaptering. I know there's no such word in the dictionary, but chaptering in the arrangement and the flows. You mentioned a little bit earlier on in your introductory remarks, and also a little bit on the region in how all that is sort of filtered or intertwined in the text, in the writings. Briefly, alas, briefly.
So the chapters in the reader proceed in a linear way, but in a reflexively linear way, as Kanaga has pointed out, but not with strict consistency and intermittently disrupted by idiosyncrasy. To some extent, the editorial mediation in the reader involves the curating of the texts so that they become part of an interlocution or a comparative matrix and not just a series of monologues moving in a predictable diachrony. Part of this interlocution, again, is the annotation by the contributing editors. The annotation embodies a perspective, a subjectivity that shapes a proposition of reading the text in the reader. We had an interesting time calibrating the style of the headnotes, didn't we, Kanaga?
Yes.
Which were written by colleagues who are invested in particular positions within debates in the field. Expectedly, the tonality varies with the sensibility. Some are straightforwardly instructive, others are polemical and willing to risk certain claims. Surely the headnotes cannot be rendered uniform because the editors come from different backgrounds and bring into the annotation their own intellectual formations, interests, sympathies, and fascinations. That being said, Kanaga and I had to reconsider expression of writing that tended to foreclose a range of possible readings or judgments that seemed irrevocable. We thus opened up the poetics of the annotation, redistributed the ideological energy, and tempered potentially preemptive rhetoric so that the point of view expressed in the headnotes serves as a proposition and not a prescription of reading. We retained the peculiarities of the writing styles and did not finesse the unevenness or asymmetry of the poetics, which in a way speaks to the texture of the text, alongside which the writers wrote. We also tried to complicate the fluency of English as a dominant language and played out the lively rearticulations of so-called professional specialist English from the writers in the region. In many ways, this ecology of writing evokes the milieu of Southeast Asia itself, which demands a diligent, urgent, playful, and imaginative method of reading.
I think we move towards. We've been very good with our timing. In fact, a favored dictum in Singapore is we are ahead of schedule. I thought, what masters of time we are that you can be ahead of schedule, but then here we are. Patrick, on that note of playfulness and of writing, could I ask you to extend your thoughts on the kind of range of writings, the mixture of writings, the interlacing of these variations from chapter to chapter, and the tone of the entire reader, or the tones of the entire reader, multiple tones on writing and reading written texts, which we are all professionally involved in as museum persons, as teachers, and as authors. And here we are looking at largely writings that already exist and re-enlivening them and bringing them to bear not just historical interest, but also interest for current engagements. How might we, you think, interconnect some of these temporalities and these phases?
The general tone, Kanaga, of the reader is one of openness and also of open-endedness, because we are aware of the live debate happening on these questions of the modern. So the chapter introductions keep the question of the modern open and try to decenter, as you have already intimated, to decenter art history as the main theoretical apparatus to govern the explication. We don't define the modern, neither at the outset nor conclusively, as we give space to the resistance or indifference to the notion or discomfort with it by the textual material itself. We let the writing constitute theoretical reflection as well, so that it is not determined by pre-existing or even hegemonic conceptualizations of modernity. I also like how Kanaga thought of the title, The Modern in Southeast Asian Art, for in this phrasing, Southeast Asian art is not burdened to represent or to modify an identity or a fully formed body of knowledge pertaining to the modern. Southeast Asian art is rather imagined geopoetically as a place or environment, a cosmos or historical terrain, an atmosphere or a material condition, a constructed region, surely, or a mutating mode of worlding in which texts had mediated the modern and vice versa. The other question, of course, is why the modern, no? Perhaps because the modern is a persistent conversation with lasting consequences. Maybe because the modern is a productive cipher of complex interests. I regard the reader as taking part in this conversation and in re-signifying the cipher. The reader appears hefty, but it does not claim to be encyclopedic. Rather, I view it as symptomatic. Heuristic in strategic ways, but also offers a wide hermeneutic horizon. It reminds us of a long duration of making and making sense of creative life in Southeast Asia and anticipates a future of more exciting inflections. At this point, I would like to thank the many scholars and translators from the region and beyond who contributed research, advice, texts, and translations to the reader. Needless to say, huge thanks as well go to the writers and artists who wrote the texts and who kindly allowed us to reproduce them, as well as their families and estates. And finally, to two esteemed colleagues in the field, John Clark and Joan Key, for their generous endorsements of the book.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. May I be permitted to say some things and then coffee break after this? No, not yet. No. I put here afterthoughts and projections, Patrick and moi. Patrick has had his afterthoughts. Let me have a go. I have two citations. One is a kind of endorsement in the spirit of John and Joan, taken from within the reader itself. This is by Ismail Zain. In a paper that he read in Kuala Lumpur in 1989, in an ASEAN Symposium on Art and Aesthetics, one of three, and one of the few occasions that ASEAN COCI, in my opinion, got it right in convening these symposiums. In it, he says, towards the conclusion of his meditations on the modern, the grand tradition, about writing and about speaking, we forget Ismail in that paper laments seriously about the loss of the oral tradition and how writing has swamped it and consigned it to silence practically. But then Ismail is not a sentimentalist. He's many things, but I don't think a sentimentalist. And he says towards the end, modern aesthetics need texts, a literate approach, to stimulate discourse and preserve discursive models, both for the retrieval of information and for constituting a basis for further theorizing. The existence of authoritative texts that are easily accessible on a regional basis, and he's talking about this region, our region here, on a regional basis is a prerequisite for aesthetic development in the region. The dialectics of a modern philosophical framework, and this is Ismail also being ostensibly and overtly worldly, even as he's concerned with the region. When he says, the dialectics of a modern philosophical framework do not depend solely on indigenous sources and on enclaves of art alone, but also on vast reservoirs of information, some of which may come from outside the traditional spheres of arts and culture. They may also come from regions outside ASEAN. This chimes with your remark about the openness of the text and their tone and the timbre of their writing. This is in, I've never had the occasion to make a pagination like this. 1989. Who's ever cited 1989 in a citation? But there it is. It's on page 1989 in volume 2. The second, may I be permitted one more citation? Quick one. This is for Eugene. It's okay. Hang around. Stick around. It's not so bad. Patrick, I'm citing you. In the Modern After, his introduction to the last chapter, which is called The Modern After Turns, he says, the very first sentence, the turn towards the contemporary required a reflection of the modern as the juncture at and from which the turn was being made. However, the conceptualization of the contemporary as the next phase of the modern, or as supplanting it, requires a reconsideration of the sequence and consequently of the chronology of the account. Eugene, the contemporary beckons. In 2019, at the end of 2018, at the end of the first workshop for the proposal of a volume on the contemporary texts, we, in our discussion, decided to suspend it for reasons that perhaps the historicalness was not sufficiently fleshed out in the workshop. Patrick has given us the license. Eugene, I urge you, hear the call of the contemporary. Rise to it, man, now. And some of us may be around to be with you, for sure. Take it. Thank you.
So our first panel is on debates and polemics in Southeast Asian art writing. And before we begin, I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists. Aminudin T.H. Siregar is currently a PhD candidate at Leiden University and also a lecturer at the Faculty of Art and Design at Institut Teknologi Bandung. And he's previously edited a number of anthologies on the subject of modern and contemporary Indonesian art. So he's an experienced anthologizer. And for this reader, Aminudin oversaw the selection of texts for Indonesia. And then Dr. Gritcha Gaiwewong is Artistic Director of the Dim Thompson Art Centre in Bangkok, as well as co-founder and director of not-for-profit art space Project 304. She's curated numerous exhibitions and currently also serves as the co-artistic director of the Thailand Biennale in Chiang Rai for 2023. And then beside her, Manupon Lungaram is a curator, producer, and independent researcher also from Bangkok, and currently also curator of the Thailand Biennale in Chiang Rai. Together, they're also experienced anthologizers. Together, they are co-editors of the Thai language volume, an anthology of Southeast Asian modern and contemporary art published in 2016. And for this reader, they jointly oversaw the selection of texts from Thailand. So for my part, just to note, I was also a contributing editor for the book and was responsible for the selection of text from Vietnam and from some other areas. We were going to be joined by our fellow editor, Roberto Paulino. Unfortunately, he's ill and wasn't able to travel to Singapore. So in his place, time permitting, I'm going to share some reflections about the Vietnamese texts and the issue of debate and polemics. So our subject today in this panel is the issue of debate and polemic, something which emerges very strongly across the board in the selection of texts for this book. And I think it could even be argued that these types of very heated polemical exchanges are in some ways quintessentially modern texts, or perhaps even paradigm texts of the modern. Today, when modern art is thoroughly accepted and even institutionalized, it's hard to recall the time when it was viciously contested, threatening, and subject to such heated differences of opinion and exchange. And yet, the texts in this book bring this passion behind the exchanges to life in their new translations. So to explore some instances of this, our panelists will each give a short presentation, after which I hope we'll have some time for questions and discussions from the floor. So Aminudin, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Bibi. Congratulations for National Gallery Singapore for the books. So I will start my presentation. Yeah. Outzick provocation, debates in post-war Indonesian art. Intellectual debates were crucial in the emergence of modern Indonesian art beside artistic experimentation with canvases. Unfortunately, traditional historiography has ignored these debates, resulting in inaccuracies, broad generalization, and falsification that impeded our understanding of historical context. This condensed presentation will examine a critical discussion between 1946 and 1948. The debates raise the following question for further investigation. How does writing art history deal with internal and external tensions between national identities? Is writing history in national frame still relevant and worth defending, given that the actors who play a role were not only Indonesians? How to write art history that transcends space and national scale? More specifically, how can historiography be criticized when it is based solely on Indonesian-centric? And what is implication of this nationalistic historiography? I will begin with a historical event rarely discussed in traditional historiography. Sultan Syahrir, Indonesian first prime minister, supported a group exhibition in August 1946. Initially, this exhibition allowed Indonesian artists to serve as cultural diplomats at the World Festival of Youth and Students in Prague, Czech Republic. The artist delegation, however, was unable to embark due to issues with legal documents. The works were then displayed at Jakarta former Batavia Kunstkring building to commemorate the country's first anniversary of independence. One of the exhibition stands-out pieces was an album containing 19 linoleum prints by Barhaudin Marasutan and Mokhtar Apin. The Indonesian government produced 36 albums with text in 3 languages, Indonesian, English, and French, and they just ignored the Dutch. In its September issue, the weekly Dutch magazine, Outzicht could be few, but due to looking outside. The opposite, there's another magazine to confront this Auszicht. This came from the Republic, named Inzicht. Inzicht in Dutch means looking to inside. So Dutch magazine Auszicht published an exhibition review by Dutch critic Dolf Verspoor. Verspoor was in Java at the time of revolution and had connection with Indonesian artists. Auszicht was published by RVD, Regeringsvoorlichtingsdienst, or the Dutch government's information service, is based in Jakarta. This magazine was regarded as relatively moderate and objective in its coverage of the Indonesian Republic struggle for independence. Oh, this one. Yeah, that's magazine. Verspoor observed the renewal and strengthening of Indonesian painting in his article, Indonesische Schilders van Heden, or Indonesian Painters Today. The emerging painters were distinct from their predecessors, who merely painted is in this natural beauty. According to Verspoor, this new generation, represented by Affandi and Sudjojono, offers a breakthrough inspired by their personalities. Furthermore, this new generation has a different taste in selecting objects. Themes in most painting are discussed using intuition rather than technique. Verspoor also in his article mentioned a lack of facilities as an issue for the artist. He described, quote, no studio, only a small room, and even economically too poor to hire a model. This is a Verspoor article in Dutch. But the interesting part for me, Verspoor acknowledged the painter's tendency as avant-garde, expressing their nation and people, or in Dutch, als avant-garde hun land en volk gevraagd, tot uitdrukking gebracht hebben. Auszicht published an article after Verspoor. Auszicht published an article by Johannes Marie Hopman, 3 months after Verspoor. Hopman, this is also a very mysterious person. I'm still looking for him. Hopman was an art historian and an educator. Later on in the 50s, he became one of a teacher in ITB, in my school. He used to lecture about modern architecture at the Batavia Kunstkring, Jakarta, before the war. His article in Auszicht was a critical response to Verspoor. Though not explicitly stated, yeah, he's a critical response, although it's not explicitly stated by him. Hopman's article, Toekomst van beeldende kunst in Indonesia, or the future of visual art in Indonesia, implied that he wanted to discuss Western art in Indonesia by using the preposition in. Verspoor, on the other hand, purposefully used the label Indonesische Schilder van Heden, indicating his support for Indonesian painters' cutting-edge activity and authority in their art. Hopman began his article with a provocative statement, quote, Indonesian painting does not yet exist and will not exist for the time being. Hopman stated that the painter's hard work naturally deserved the audience's attention. However, regardless of the achievement, all paintings do not represent characteristic of new Indonesian art. Instead, expressing Indonesian painter, the painting expressing Indonesian painters' fascination with Western is very visible. Hopman went on to say that, I quote, the paintings contain elements of the East, but were executed like modern Western art. As a result, the pictures lack Eastern characters, which surprise us. There will be no Indonesian painting if not for Kokoska, Klee, Mans, Chagall, Utrillo, and so on. Previously, Verspors postulated that Indonesian painting is experiencing a revolution where the painters consciously left behind old value to give birth to new creation. Reversely, Hofmann disagreed with Verspors' justification, which was deemed hasty. Instead of believing in the revolution, Hofmann suggested that Indonesian painters concentrate on the process of the progress. Hofmann closed his article by saying, quote, "If Indonesian has reached such a level, then its value will be more than something simply worth to look at. And Indonesian art will be valuable to the world. I believe Indonesian art will reach that stage if it can be patient." Like PB and Sermin, always patient, waiting for my response. In the following edition of Auzi, April 1947, fortunately, I just found this article. It should be part of the so maybe the next edition you still have a job, Patrick, a postscript, yeah. Just and then I just realized the context of this text. In following edition of Auzik, April 1947, Simon Admiral responded to Hofmann's article. In the same year, Admiral, as some of you may know, Admiral founded Indonesia's first famous art academy, the Faculty of Art and Design of Bandung Institut of Teknologi. And since the late 1920s in Batavia, he has worked as an artist, designer, and critic. Admirals wrote an article titled Rondom de Hedendaagse Indonesische Schilderkunst, or around contemporary art, around contemporary Indonesian painting. Because sometimes Hedendaagse could be mean contemporary in Dutch, or also could be modern. But sometimes the Dutch will use moderne rather than Hedendaagse. So Hedendaagse more refer to contemporary. Admiral acknowledged the views of some who say that Indonesian painters still use Western method. However, according to him, Indonesian painters had merged the Western method in their creative process. So this factor was no longer significant. Admiral then criticized Hofmann's points of view, associating the achievement of new paintings with classic Indonesia. Admiral said in his writing, as you see in the there's no point to compare the art of these Indonesian young painters with their old tradition. We can assume that they have released themselves from it and are fully rooted in the now. In the now. What is it? Contemporary. In addition, Admiral also asks why there are still people who compare modern Indonesian painting with European art. According to him, the two are different. At this point, Admiral would like to state that Western art is not the only master of narrative who has authority and is compatible to make comparisons between himself and the art developing outside him. Therefore, according to Admiral, it is essential to understand that art outside Europe will someday create and construct its history. It's very interesting. The debate in Auzik magazine lasted only a short time. Admiral's article in April 1947 was the last, yet in February 1947, same year, Sudjojono articles appeared in the Revolutionary magazine, which specifically challenged Hofmann's propositions. Revolutionary is a magazine in Bahasa published by Pesindo, Indonesian Socialist Youth, which Sudjojono also part of this institution. With a heroic title, Kami Tahu Kemana Seni Lukis Indonesia Akan Kami Bawa, we know where we will be taking Indonesian painting, Sudjojono asserted that Indonesian artists have the right to self-determination. This is because the artists define the art and its development without a guide from or as directed by the colonialists. And art does not exclusively belong to the West. Quote, "We Indonesian admit that our painting style is Western by characteristic. But to say that it is not an Indonesian painting is untrue. Sudjojono then closed his article by saying that Indonesian artists will continue to progress forward, continuing their revolution and enabling its people to become artistic, because he believed that, quote, our revolution is not only intellectual, but artistic. So far, I already described the context of the debate in the history of modern Indonesian art involving actors from various backgrounds. As a result, I think Sudjojono was not the leading man, I just realized, and he was one of many people who played a part back then. His famous article, "We Know Where We Take Indonesian Painting," did not appear out of nowhere, as has been perpetuated in conventional historiography. The article links to previous texts. To conclude, I think it is time to criticize nationalistic historiography as defined by nationalist thinking and pay more attention to the transnational perspective. Historiographer can thus investigate sources and discourses that have been intentionally or unintentionally overlooked. Otherwise, writing art history in Indonesia will lose its context.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate that you drew out this example, because I think one of the pleasures of the reader is being able to read a number of texts which respond to each other in the original sequence. And as you mentioned, the Sudjojono text is well known, but the other kind of web of text to which it relates is, for me at least, a new discovery kind of unpacked in the book. So perhaps we can continue with the Thai case. So Griditya, if you'd like to start off.
Thank you so much. Can I have... So first of all, I would like to congratulate TK, Patrick, and everyone who get involved in this epic project. And it is really, really exciting to be here. And so thanks for your presentation. And I think it's almost like, I feel like, you guys will have a lot of joy to read all these 300 texts, because it's kind of mirror with each other. Actually, I don't have to say anything because it's exactly the same as in Thailand, So it's really interesting. So I just want to walk through very quickly and looking at the text that we select, and also recommend by the editors from the Thailand part. And I try to be brief. And so one would wonder about the position of Siam then and Thailand in the colonial period and how we barely survived colonization. Okay. So this mainstream discourse, as Thailand has never been colonized, we are like independent country, was actually challenged by the progressive Siamese leftist historian and thinkers, also sociologists, who argue that we were under crypto-colonization or internal colonization from the mid-19th century onwards. So that's why that was the context, of a few first group of writings that we selected, which is the writings of King Rama V when he went to their European tours, in search of the new alliance to witness the modernization and civilization, as well as to maintain our own sovereignties, aka he's trying to negotiate with the empire, which is the French and the British. So the first group of the text, this is not really like, the final one, the final that we got it almost like the final version, but I just want to kind of take you through briefly, like they were written like from 1905 until the World War II, right? And so this is show how Siam strive to survive the geopolitical issues in Southeast Asia, and it plays the role of buffer state and the bamboo diplomacy and sought civilization, as Thongchai suggested in his very important essays, The Quest for Civilized. So that's come about King Chulalongkorn, first European tour in 1897. And also the second one is in 1907. And which is the birth of Klaiban, or far away from home. The letter for King Chulalongkorn to his daughter. So you see the announcement of photography contest in 1905, which is in between, before he went to the second European tour, and then the second one, the speech of Chulalongkorn, and also the letters of the princess. And I think this one, the whole kind of, you see the consequences of how a small country that served, as a buffer state between the two major empires, wanting to expand and annex this land for their colonies. So in order to seek this new alliance, as you see, the king went to this country. So this is the second tour that he went to Venice. And in the letters that we published, it was when he went to Venice Biennale, and then he criticized and also commented on many works that he saw, and I think he also bought a few pieces, as well as he really liked the artist that he saw in I think Giardini, so that's why he invited him to make the mural at the Ananta Samakom, which is Galileo Kini. So if you guys go back to Venice Biennale, his work is still there, in Giardini. So and then this is the other image that I found is very interesting, is he went to see Bismarck in Berlin. And then out of curiosity, I just want to know, okay, what kind of project that he went, and then I found out, I asked my friends, the curator friends from Germany, to send me the Mannheim exhibition in 1907. And this is actually you can get this catalog, from German museum. And this is what, the whole kind of catalog, and also the floor plan, of exhibitions. This is how the king experienced the exhibition space, and also the whole idea of exhibition and exposition. It was so important, and it became one of the tools, for the new, the young kings trying to kind of use it as a propaganda, I would say, to kind of present the whole ideas of modernization and civilization within Thailand. So we had first, if we look at the exhibition history in Thailand, so the first time was done during King Rama V. Okay, so this is one of the important kind of mark, for us. And then within this first chapter, after Rama V passed away, his son Rama VI, he also was a very interesting writer, and he used his pen name Asawapahu, and he graduated from UK, and also when he came back, he criticized his father's modernization of his own country, saying, quote, civilization at any price, which also re-quoted by Dr. Piriya Kairek in his text, which we already also published, in this anthology. King Rama VI, Aswapahu, lament about the dying of craftsmanship and hardship of artists and artisans, and that they lack support from public funding and attention. It also suggests the birth of nationalism and the fear of the loss of national heritage. So that's why he started the first art school. It's called Pho Chang School during his reign, to preserve Siamese artisanship, craftsmanship, and traditional knowledge. And he also started the Department of Fine Arts. So this sentiment slowly gave rise to the identity issues, a precursor of Thainess, or Kwam Pen Thai, a major discourse in Thailand in later years, especially during the Cold War, 70s, 80s, and 90s onwards. So who are these people who wrote this text, right? So we're wondering, what are they writing about? What is their political agenda? So in the colonial period, so we saw the text written by the king, Rama V, Rama VI, in the first chunk of our text. The elite, we have Prince Damrong and Prince Wan, the foreigners, Westerners, Guerini, the Italian military, who also was asked by the king to be the commissioner of the Thai pavilion in the World Exposition in Torino in 1911, and which is quite interesting to see those three type of writers in this the first chunks, So the second part that I'm really interested in was the Cold War period, So we are really in between this, what Benedict Anderson called the American era in Thailand, So we have Welcome to Bangkok, with Coca-Cola, and then the other part was the threat of, the communism, is going to eat Thailand, right? So I kind of steal this from Ajahn Thongchai Sayam map without his permission. So I asked him here for the permission. But look at the list of the text, and the writers here. It's quite interesting. There is more mix, from, we have less royalty, and we have more elite and commoners, as well as Westerners who sometimes become more Thai than Thais. So let me give you some example. Corrado Ferraggi, once gave a speech on behalf of Siam in the seminar, and this one in 1959, Mutual Appreciation of Eastern and Western Art. Let me quote him. He was one of the national committee from Thailand. So Asia, like other parts of the world, is undergoing culture adaptation due to modern life. He spoke about the mutual appreciation of Eastern and Western art, and it's really interesting to see how he addressed himself. Another quote, but when we speak about reciprocal appreciation of Eastern and Western art, we Easterners find ourselves in the position of inferiority in comparison with the Western people, end quote. So maybe he forgot that he was and is Italian, but he just changed his identity, name and citizenship to Thai, not because he loved Thailand, but because of the politics of the World War II, okay? So however, in this regard, he also addressed still similar concern that Asawapāhu or Rama 6 about the lack of support from the state and how there should be more regional exchange, which is pretty much advanced, in terms of thinking regionally. And this was quite timely because 8 years after his speech in 1967, the ASEAN community was founded. Okay, so this period we saw the birth of art historians who mainly came from aristocratic background, like Mom Jao Supatharadik Disakul, whose work are not included here, but he was like one of the first curator in the National Museum, and he was a son of Prince Damrong, who was the father of historiography in Thailand. And then we have artist writer like Nona Pak Nam, professional art historian who was here briefly, Dr. Piriya Kairek, artist, writer, and curator Apinan Pochanon, and also American scholars who come to Thailand on the grants from the State Department and work closely with USIS and Bangkok National Museum Elizabeth Lyons, and Corrado Ferraggi or Sin Pirasi, Italian artist who taught at Silpakorn University, and British writers and ex-diplomat Michael Smithies, who had like different interests in Thai modern and contemporary art. Corrado Ferraggi and Nona Pak Nam, they use contemporary art quite often, the same as what you described, And I think it's quite interesting to see that. And then they wrote about movement, aesthetic, ecosystem, and art ecology in 1960. So in the 70s, we saw the rise of the leftist movement, rendered by the book articles and essays by this person who was so important for us in terms of the leftist intellectual. His name is Jit Pumisak, or he used his pen name, Thipakorn. And here come along with the essays by Jan Up, who spoke about the October Uprising, and also the Manifesto of United Artist Fronts of Thailand, which is published in between the 2 Octobers. And it's interesting to see that the new kind of art movement emerged in the 80s through the text of all the artists, writers, curators, and artists like Apinan Periya in exhibition catalogs and newspaper, especially in the English newspaper. And then in Montien Bunma's letter to his wife during his study in Paris, and he kind of gossip about nicely about Araya. And I think it's so beautiful because in Araya books, he also gossip about Montian, so I think they're really kind of funny, interesting relationship because they're like, they study together at Silpagon. But I think that is the marking point for me, that Montian, he described about Araya. It's a mistake that she wants to go to study in Europe, only the technique. I think it doesn't work that way because we have to think about the thinking process instead of technique. And he also criticized a lot of artists that, was in a period exhibition that is totally outdated. And I wish we published this before he died. And because the discourse in Thailand is still, is still keep going about what is contemporary art, what is modern art. And then we have like some more like art critics and writers, who concerned about art writing, education, Chetana, Amnat, and Kukrit Pamod, who's asked a hardcore question about being Thainess. And especially people like Kukrit and Piriya, they always kind of found the art in the exhibition after 1935. Like it's all about copying Westerners, so it's no such thing as Thai art. What is it? These similar questions. So what do we learn from this text? And are there anything missing or changes? So one thing that we learned was the more things change, the more things remains the same. Since the early 20th century, things remain the same in terms of public funding, as mentioned by Aswapahu in Siamese art, to Corrado Ferrucci. Until now, art is still under-recognized and lacks sufficient support by the states. Even in the 80s, Sulak Sivalak, who wrote about culture policy, he urging the state to support art and culture. And we finally got the new Ministry of Culture and Office of Contemporary Art only in the year 2003, so which is totally late. We've been complaining for almost 100 years, and then we got it. Thailand, it was super sleepy state. I'm so happy that one of our Ministry of Culture representative is here. And I hope your boss listened to you, Naken. Okay, so there's a saying about the younger generation in Bangkok is not Thailand, and Thailand is not Bangkok. So if we look at the list again, most of the texts, they are highly Thai-centric and Bangkok-focused. So there's a lack of diversity in voices such as women, provincial project, or subcultures, which are totally absent. And what needs to be done in the future, if we have another future and another project in the future, is the decentralization and diversity of voices from the others outside of Bangkok. And the subject matter should be more about art history from below, small narrative, and alternate history. So I wish we could include more essays from younger generation of the artists, such as the late Thanom Chapakdi, who started his career in the early 90s, and Paisan Thirapong, with the art writers, reporters, and columnists. So maybe this can be the next project for TK and Patrick and NGS, which you can add more contemporary art, and we need another 8 years or 10 years to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I believe Manupon will continue with some further reflections on the Thai text.
Hi, hello. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. And with Kritya, we work on this project. And Kritya already gave the overview and analysis of the whole text from Thailand. I will focus more on the text that written by artists. So it's like the role of artists as writers. And Kritya already mentioned Corrado Ferrucci. In this text, which is called Contemporary Thai Art, that he wrote in 1961. He did not believe that the training of modern Thai artists should rely on the forms of traditional Thai art, Although students were encouraged to study traditional art in order to be imbued with its essential character, this principle is reflected in this text, where Feroci wrote, quote, "It is only in the spirit of the old art that young artists may get inspiration, not in the form." Feroci also addressed the challenges facing the new generation of modern artists in Thailand, which he attributed to the historical status of the artist and the lack of the support on contemporary art infrastructure and audience, the same problem that Kritya already mentioned. And then the next writer I would like to talk about is Prayun Uluchada, or we know him as from his pen name as Nona Pak Nam. So Prayun Uluchada is a well-known Thai artist who also wrote about art, archaeology, and history under his pen name Nona Pak Nam. And in this article titled "Contemporary Art of Thailand," written in 1965, Prayun Uluchada described the struggles of early Thai modern artists for acceptance, noting in particular the first exhibition of the Chakrawat Silapin, or the Artist League, held at the Sala Chalerm Krung Theatre in Bangkok in 1944. For Chakrawat Silapin, he mentioned this exhibition because of the exhibition, the exhibit that showed the work by not just only professional artists, but also from amateur artists and also from students from Silpakorn University. So in this article, Prayun criticized the organization of the exhibition, which displayed the artwork by professional artists alongside commercial artworks. The writer also felt that the exhibition lacked of the international standard of artworks and lack of the curation. Therefore, there's no progressive contributing to the development of the contemporary art in the country. This one is also the article by Prayun Uluchada on two great master of mural painting, Kru Kongpet and Kru Thong Yu. This article was written in 1987, and this painter were created at the Suvarnaram temple and other temples located at the Thonburi side of Chao Phraya River. The two masters painted their mural on the Buddhist theme, depicting the different episodes of the 10 lives of the Buddha. In this text, Prayun analyzed the unique characteristic and style of each artist, as well as their artistic achievement. Kru Kongpet, who is the Chinese origin, was known to be the first in the country to use Chinese brushstroke in the murals. Nona Pak Nam praised Kru Kongpet for his painting skill, which were as superbly as any Thai traditional mural painters, and for his ability in subsequent years to adopt Western concept of linear perspective to the mural without compromising integrity. In comparison, the work of Kru Thong Yu appeared to adhere strictly to the traditional techniques passed down from generation to generation. His approach to detail and method of painting were highly traditional. This text reveals detailed study of these masterpieces, which at one time were classified as religious mural paintings by unknown artists, as they never signed their names or left personal marks on the walls. So this is another text by the artist Amnat Yensabai. Amnat described the transformation of the role of the artist during a period of increased Western influence from the mid-19th to early 20th centuries. His text is especially concerned with the issue of craftsmanship, noting initially the important impact of artist-designer Panellists and his active promotion of craft and traditional architecture, as well as the later institutionalization of craft practice within an academic system. Amnat used of an older form of Thai use of Chang or craftsman in the text, not silapin or an artist or artist. In particular, his attention to the curriculum of the Pochang Academy found in 1913 to promote the study of craft offer a counterpoint to the better known history of the Modern Art Academy of Silpakorn University. The text written by artists also reveal how the ideal of the artist's role had come to the contest by new paradigm for the social role and practice of art, particularly in the 1970s when the student mass movement took place. This is another text by artist Tang Zhang. Zhang Tang. Zhang Tang. It's called Questions, Humans, Art. Zhang Tang. This text, Zhang wrote in 1971. He ponders the answer to the question of what is art and what is to be human. In this text, he regards the value of art lies in the human's creative intelligence. For Zhang, a work of art is the product of human intelligence. So for this text is the manifesto. So the text that's written by artists is ranging in different forms. This one is the manifesto of the United Artists Front of Thailand. They launched a movement known as Art for Life, inspired by the earlier writings of Thai Marxist theorist and poet Jit Pumisak. This manifesto, initially issued by the United Artists Front, described their analysis of the broader situation in Thailand, including in the field of arts and culture, as well as offering a series of goals for future artistic activity. To achieve this goal and support the democratic movement, the United Artists Front also began to organize art and cultural activities in Bangkok and other provinces, working closely with the National Student Center of Thailand. The United Artists Front was active for 22 months until the event of the Thammasat University massacre on 6 October 1976 happened when the police and paramilitary force surrounded Thammasat University and start to open fire on unarmed students protesting inside. Subsequently, the military staged a coup and overthrew the Prime Minister, Seni Pramod. After the political situation stabilized, the United Artists Front regrounded in 1979 to organize an alternative exhibition space called the Open Arts Exhibition of Thailand. The Art for Life movement they initiated also had a long-term influence. The United Artists Front of Thailand was the first art organization of its kind in Thailand to be explicitly concerned with political issues related to the life of the masses. The next one is a personal letter by Monten Bunma. This letter was written by Muntian to Num, who is his wife, during the period when he was studying sculpture in Paris at the National School of Fine Arts in 1987. The letter expressed his view on art creation and art education, and particularly the idea that the study of techniques and skill had been overvalued compared with a deeper philosophical reflection on the process of creation, allowing for the generation of new ideas and human experiences. It's like what Kritya already talked about, Muntian letter, about the time that he spent in Paris, that he talked about Araya, about why she focused more on in terms of technique and skill. The last one is also text by Apinan Posayanon. He was among a group of young Thai artists who were regarded as the avant-garde in the 1980s, as well as practicing art as an artist and working as a lecturer at the Faculty of Fine Art at Chulalongkorn University. This article titled Pilasi Show Usher in Postmodern Art, a review of Kamon Pausawat Song for the Dead Art Exhibition, was written by Apinan. And he was also active as an art critic, reviewing exhibition in the English language newspaper Bangkok Post. This review of the first solo exhibition of the artist Kamon Pausawat, following his return from his study at the Otis Parsons School of Design in Los Angeles. Like Apinan and other young artists of the time, Kamon was interested in non-traditional media and multidisciplinary approaches to art making. In the review, Apinan links Kamon's works to the idea of postmodernism, kickstarting the discussion of this emerging discourse in the Thai context. The article also indicates the inconception of contemporary art in Thailand in the mid-1980s. So these are the selection of texts that we select, and it gives a different perspective and voices from the artists from different generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for highlighting the importance of the artist's voice, because I think that's something that really shows in the reader as well, the contribution that artists made to the writing of art history and to art criticism as well. And for also, I think, mentioning the idea of the multiple types of writers, the external gaze on Southeast Asia, but also the kind of worldliness of the Southeast Asian gaze abroad, both kind of complicating this dynamic of local and international. I know we're short on time, so I'm going to share very briefly about some of the selection of texts from Vietnam, and then perhaps we can finish for our coffee break at 3:10. So there's around, I think about 27 finally texts from Vietnam included in the Modern Reader. And I want to highlight 3 clusters of texts because they're especially polemical, or they really show the position of writers arguing to get against each other very directly. And they have such a strong kind of polemical position. And I feel it's very interesting characteristic of this modern time. So if I can have the, yes, thanks. And yeah, I also thought it's so wonderful to see the kind of materiality of the original texts as well. So the first cluster that I wanted to highlight were debates over pedagogy in colonial Indochina. So I think it's quite well known that the situation of art education in Indochina developed rather differently depending on the particular location. The art school in Phnom Penh focused on the idea of the revival of traditional materials and traditional crafts, and was quite rigorous in excluding any kind of pedagogical material that was seen as linked to the Western Academy. And I think some of the texts that Roger selected for the Cambodian section deal with the rationale for that. But in this cluster of texts, it's actually a set of letters from the archive between the two directors of different art schools in Indochina. At this point, Auguste Silis is the director of the art school in Phnom Penh that is pursuing this neo-traditionalist approach. And Victor Tadieu, the new director of the Indochina School of Fine Arts in Hanoi, who wants to pursue a more modernizing agenda, who believes that the students should be taught oil painting, should be taught a kind of drawing-based pedagogical method. And then finally, the third text, a text published some 15 years later by a Vietnamese artist, Nguyen Do Cung, and signed by another Vietnamese, a group of Vietnamese artists, protesting the reforms inside the Indochina School of Fine Arts. And I think it's really critical, this text, because it shows that even in this colonial education system, the Vietnamese artists were able to mobilize their own critical positions and agency and put those out to the public as well. So, okay, I won't read the extent of the text on the slide, but in these two letters, both of which date from 1924, the two directors of the art schools make their competing cases. And what's funny is they're not writing directly to each other. They're basically writing letters of complaint about one another to the Governor General of Indochina. But in these letters, which what Governor General would ever have read these, I don't know. They really go into considerable detail about their art historical sources, their pedagogical basis, their conceptual ideas. So Silis emphasizes the idea that was very common in the kind of discourse about Cambodian art, that it was impossible to impose a so-called foreign teaching methodology. And it has a lot of course, patronizing ideas about, the Cambodian mentality, the idea that taste had been degraded by contact with the West and could only be saved by a very rigorous adherence to tradition. And here, images from a colonial period publication of an artisan in the École des Arts Cambodgienne, and also a similar school in Vietnam, one of the professional schools, art schools founded earlier, which kind of concentrated much more on existing local craft practice. So in this letter, he writes, it's a fact that the population of Cambodia absorbs influences from abroad only grudgingly. So, we have to kind of preserve this space of tradition. Meanwhile, Victor Tadieu's letter in response, and I put up some historical slides because I think the images also serve to really demonstrate how the difference in pedagogy manifested in practice, because these are from the same time period as the images we saw earlier. So Tadieu asks, isn't it a natural law to develop, to allow a kind of modern intellectual production that's in keeping with our times? If he calls it archaeological dilettantism, to continue to look back to the past and re-practice it in a formulaic fashion. And he asks at one point, is it necessary to be in what he calls slavish imitation of the past? So it's interesting to see such passionate language kind of jumping out from the archive. And then finally, this is Nguyen Do Cung's text of 1939. So what had happened in the gap between these texts is that Tadieu's program at the Indochina School of Arts had been reorganized by a subsequent director. And the second director, Everest Joncher, who took over the post in 1937, wanted the students to concentrate more on artisanry and craft. But by that stage, the Vietnamese generation of students were very invested in the concept of the artist and perceived that this was a kind of status demotion as well as a reflection on their abilities. So they wrote in a Vietnamese newspaper, and this is one of the important modernizing Vietnamese periodicals of the period, Nay Nay. And he wrote, Mr. Joncher, do you honestly think that the people of Annam are not capable of understanding the noble beauty of intellect? Since you yourself are a sculptor, I would invite you, and he invites him to compare his own work with the temple carving tradition in Vietnam. And I love this passage because it really looks like a social media call out of today. And I think in the translation, Mr. Joncher, he even spells his name wrong. So it kind of gives the sense of the passion of this polemic as well. And there were some follow-up articles in the magazine, which unfortunately we couldn't include the complete discourse in the reader, but it makes a nice cluster where you see these different positions quite passionately articulated by the different parties. And then jumping ahead, it was interesting to see Gridice share about Chit Pumisak and the leftist impulse in modern art. What we see in the Vietnamese text is that the kind of leftist impulse begins as a framework that's kind of top-down, and the earliest leftist texts are actually by political figures or cultural cadres who are themselves, highly ranked in the Communist Party. So we have these two texts by Chung Ting, who was at that point, I'm not sure, later Secretary General of the Communist Party, but written during the First Indochina War, so the war where Vietnam had declared its independence from France, and where the Communist Party had dissolved itself in order to form a united front, but the kind of communist leadership was still in the background and later in the foreground of the struggle. So these two texts date from that period, Chung Ching, and then a text by Ho Chi Minh, a letter written directly by Ho Chi Minh to an artist exhibition that was taking place in the Viet Minh base area in 1951. Chung Ching's text was called Some Issues and Dilemmas Regarding Literature and Art, but it was a speech that was directed to artists specifically around the issues relating to the kind of leftist framework for art and the new social role of the artist. So his agenda was to convince artists of the kind of correct path to the making of art. There'd been some resistance to the idea that art needed to be very strongly tied to the new political environment. So he's arguing or stating that, in fact, we need to consider art as an instrumental tool for the just cause of the Vietnamese Revolution. Similarly, the text also deals with issues about the idea of art criticism, whether the masses need to be able to study art to criticize it, arguing that actually they don't. We need to put aside the kind of elitist ideas of expertise and allow a critical perspective from the mass body of work. And this had very practical implications. At this time, in the base areas of the Viet Minh, the artists would have to begin showing their work to members of the public, especially workers, farmers, and soldiers, and record and note their criticisms for feedback. Similarly, Ho Chi Minh's letter specifies that artists are soldiers on a cultural front and must concentrate on the work of workers, farmers, and soldiers, really putting in very clear terms the idea that artists are expected to be part of the political struggle the same as everyone else and to contribute to that struggle and orient their work on a class basis. So this was the leftist position in the kind of obviously intense, violent, stressful period of the First Indochina War. But what we can see in the reader, if you chart the text from Vietnam, is how this became part of a kind of a system of art as well in the North. Some moments of artists' resistance to that, wanting to articulate what were the limits of this framework, especially one of the texts we've included from the late 1950s. And then even until the 1980s, how to unpack and in some ways experience some release from the demands of this system. So two of the texts in the 1980s that were provided by the art critic Nguyen Quan especially deal with the Doi Moi period when artists were first grappling with how to exit the same system that is established by these initial texts. So that's one of the long trajectories in the reader as well. And then finally, a very interesting cluster of texts from artists, art critics, and writers in the south of Vietnam in the 60s and early 70s. So this is the period of the Republic of Vietnam. South was separated from North. And while the leftist framework and socialist realism was dominant in the North, in the South, there was a broader interest in modernism and interest in kind of connecting to the international. This was also the time when Vietnam actually held a Biennale-type exhibition in 1961. And I'm very happy that we were able to include some texts from this period in the reader, and it was actually due to the research of some other scholars who kindly gave me some suggestions for this part. So Thuy N. D. Tran and Chung Dai Vo, who both researched in this area, brought out some of the very interesting manifestos and passionate conversations that intellectuals in the South were having, and particularly in concern with the idea of newness and the new. And this is an area of Vietnamese art history that has been relatively marginalized because, by comparison with the histories of the North. And in fact, the artistic work from this period, many of the texts from this period are not in wide circulation. So it's exciting and I think important to include these positions here in the reader. So we have two different statements from the Young Vietnamese Artists Association from 1966 and 1973, both giving a passionate case for breaking away not only from the heritage of the colonial period, but also from what they perceive as the more rigid definition of art that's prevailing in the North. But I think also making many similar complaints about lack of infrastructure, lack of support, commercialization. And last text, this text, The New Language in Painting, published in the magazine Sang Tao, Creation in 1960, very vibrant because it's a roundtable discussion from 9 different artists, critics, and writers who all passionately articulate their own position. So it's a very long text. We've had to abridge it for the reader. But you can see a discussion that really captures the intensity of a moment about the idea of newness, modernism, anxieties about the national, and also, ranging quite widely over the international and Vietnamese art history as well. Okay, so I think I will have to leave my part of the presentation there, and please join me in thanking our panelists for the first.